I don't wanna read all of this, but if anybody wants it later, I can get it to you, but, I wanna kind of pick parts out of it. And, the first paragraph I thought was pretty good. Paul was born in Nelson on October 29th, 1924. And it was the same night that somebody blew up a coach on the Kettle Valley Railroad and killed Peter Verrigan, the leader of the Orthodox Doukhobors, who lived all around in that Kinnaird area where it had lived. This bit of trivia is significant because it affected Paul's life later on. I'll bring that up later. He was the 28th grandchild of Mark and Rosalie DuMont of Antwerp, Belgium. He was the second last to live. Now, when you think of 1924, there really were no roads then. The only cars that were available were maybe Model Ts. Everything was horse and wagon, everything to do with horses, except for one thing, the Kettle Valley Railroad, which ran right through there. And I'm sure that my dad had to get my mother pregnant to Nelson to the hospital on that railroad. Must have been really terrifying, I think. Before he was 1 year old, Paul, parents found out that he had lost the sight of his left eye. I heard later that it was probably caused by an attack of polio, but he lived with that for the rest of his life, and he did very well.
Could drive a horse truck.
Oh, he did everything. He drove until he was almost 90 years old. In 1929, my dad was working in the Wally sawmill in Castlegar. He was the head sawyer there. It was a big steam mill, and for those days it was really a good sawmill. It was high production, double cut band mills, everything steam, shotgun steam. And when the Depression hit in 29, practically the next day the mill shut down. Everything shut down. And Dad, of course, lost his job. And I don't know, probably before that, he must have bought the homestead at Hunter Siding. And with it came a 160-acre timber lease. And as soon as he lost his job, he decided that they would have to move there. So, again, the only transportation was the railroad. There were no roads to speak of, no cars, no truck. So on the first load, my oldest brother Mark and him took his teams of horses. I think he had either 2 or 3 teams of horses and some cattle and everything that they could throw in a boxcar, and they rode it, and they had to go first to Spokane City, where the railroad ended at the south end of Spokane Lake, and then about once a week they would load the locomotive and the cars on a barge, and they would tow them up to Roseberry and then unload them, and then you would go the last 8 miles again on rail. The rail from Roseberry to Nakusp was built at that time. So then the next load, of course, Dad had to go back, and he brought Mom and the rest of the kids. He only had 8 kids. So he moved the rest of them up there. At Hunter's, there was pretty meager, but there were 2 log homes there that were pretty big. They were all one room, but one of them was in pretty good shape that was suitable for living quarters, and the other one he used as a barn. And that was about a kilometer up from the siding on the track. Down at the railroad track at that time, there was just a shed down there. I don't think it was manned in any way, but there was a telegraph terminal down there. You were able to send and receive telegrams because the wires ran along the railroad all over Canada practically. Now, when you got everybody moved up there, what do? To survive. So it was just at that time that the government decided to build the road through from New Denver. I guess it probably from Nelson, New Denver might have been built from New Denver to Nakusp. So Dad had these teams of horses, and he was able to get a contract building the highway, and, which really, gave him a bit of income. It was actually an amazing piece of work. A lot of you probably driven along Spokane Lake now. You know, it's this very steep side hill, there was a lot of rock work. All the rock was drilled with hand-held drills and sledgehammers, and then they loaded them with dynamite and blew it. All the dirt was moved with teams of horses and pulling these little scrapers. There was, during the road construction and later, I can remember there was dynamite and plastic caps stored all over the place.
You played with it.
Yeah, it's just a wonder that any of us survived. Well, I can tell you one instance. I was in the kitchen with my mom. This is a little later on after we built a new house, and we heard this screaming, you know, and all of a sudden the door flies open, and my brother Bob comes in. God, there was skin hanging all over his hand, and blood everywhere. And my mother had to go and fix it. There was no emergency rooms then.
That was a plastic cap.
Yeah, playing with plastic caps, you know. They were very sensitive. And
You only ever do that once.
he must have done okay though, because he was a gunner in the Navy. He must have had a couple things. I don't know how long they lived in that log house, but Dad, I don't know how he did all these things, but he built a frame house, and it had a concrete foundation under the basement, no floor in the basement, but that was built, and which he later added on to a lot, and then he built a couple outbuildings for chickens, and he built a little building that became the first hunter siding school. It was just up above our house. It was very small. It was about, I don't know, 20 feet square maybe. And the other thing that amazed me is that by 1930, when I was born in August, that road has been built all the way through there. And I don't know how they could have possibly built it that quick, because it wasn't there in 29. So only in a couple of years, using horses and all this handwork, they were able to build that road right through to the cusp. And when I was born in August, I was born in the cusp. There was a hospital there. Of course, the road, well, probably, he didn't have a car, so I would think we rode the railroad up to the cusp too. But when he came to pick us up at the hospital, my dad bought a Model A Ford. And that just made things completely different. Now, you could get from our place to the cusp, you could get to New Denver. You could even drive to Caramias if you wanted to spend 3 days on the road. No, Paul was now about 6 years old, and he began school in the little schoolhouse, the one that was built just up above our house. And I think Sister Lil was the teacher at that time. Both the girls, I think all the girls went to boarding school in Nelson, and then
Isabel, yeah.
Lil and Rosalie went on and became teachers. But I think Lil was the first one in this little house. Then Mark and Bob left to go to school in Vancouver and on to University of Alberta after that. So the family was really thinning out, but Paul and I were home, and Carl. Shortly after 29, several families of the Orthodox Dukeables moved up from the Castlegar area into Hills, which was a couple miles south of us. And this was really important for our family, because their kids had to have schooling, and you know, there was only 3 or 4 of us, so we couldn't have a school. You had to have 18 students, I think, in that time to establish a school and be accredited. So somehow or other, my dad arranged to build the one-room hunter siding school, which is still there. If you ever drive down there, it's just not too far from the head of Spokane Lake, you watch on the right side. And it looks same as it did when I went to it.
Did Auntie Rose teach in that school for a while?
Yeah, she did,
Who?
Auntie Rose.
yeah.
She taught there from the time the new school was built until 1943, when I left as well, yeah.
She did,
All these Dukesport kids that came in, they, none of them spoke English when they came to school. They came in grade 1 and they all spoke Russian. And Rosalie was always afraid, you know, like Paul and I were there to, you know, to help teach them to learn Russian, or English, but she was afraid that we were gonna learn Russian.
My dad said he could understand.
But you can see why Paul and I were closer together than I was with my other brothers. I guess we were closer in age. He was only 6 years older. We went to school together. We fished, we hunted, you know, we picked mushrooms and all those things that you do, gathered berries and,
shoot squirrels,
yeah.
shoot squirrels.
We didn't do too many stupid things, but a few.
You have to tell them about
The grasshoppers?
Yeah, maybe I'll try and fit that in. You know, and we rode the Model A everywhere. Had to be just a fantastic vehicle.
Did you go through lots of tires?
That was a terrible snow belt around there. We used to get 10 feet of snow in the winter, and there was really no snow removal equipment, but that Model A with chains on it would just go in. You know, after Dad was finished working on the highway though, he had to do something, so he hired 3 or 4 Chinese that had come off the railroad construction, and on his timber lease, there was a bunch of big old cedars in there. They were shelled, and these Chinese with hand crosscut saws, they cut these in 7-foot lengths, and then they split them with a wedge and a hammer and split fence posts. And they did that continuously. And then in the winter, Carl and Paul or whoever was home with a team and a sled, they hauled all those fence posts out, piled them along the tracks at Hunter's Siding, and with the idea that he was going to sell them, but it was a really good project, except you couldn't sell a post anywhere. You know, it was the dirty 30s, there was just nothing going on. And I saw a picture, I think if Louis is here, I thought his dad might have had that picture of this pile of fence posts. It's incredible, it's as far as you could see. But they just kept hauling them out, piling them up because there was nothing else to do. And, but
Sounds like a DuMont.
37 was actually probably the worst year of the Depression. But by 39, when World War II started, everything opened up, you know, the farmers on the prairie started buying posts, and my dad sold all the fence posts eventually. And then after that, there was still, from the old growth cedar there, somewhere he got hold of a shingle machine. I'd never seen one before for cutting sawn shingles, and that was done by 2 really thin saws, one to cut them this way and the other one to trim them. And the unique part about that was that on the site there was a high pressure water system that came from a diverted creek and a tank up in the mountain, and it was 8-inch wood stake pipe came down there, and it was a hell of a head on it. This whole thing was run by a water pelting wheel with flat belts and shafts and God knows what else, and the shingle machine, I can remember exactly how it was. It was a very, it was all eccentrics and ratchets and slides. You know, you put a block in there and it would set it out to right so the shingle was cut at a taper, you know. And then Carl was the sawyer. He grabbed the shingle when it came off and trimmed one side, trimmed around, trimmed the other, and it was quite great. And then Paul and I used to pack it afterwards, after school. But in 1939,
that.
my
Someone have to question, what?
Is that where Grandpa lost his finger?
what was that?
Grandpa lost his finger.
Carl.
Grandpa,
Carl.
or Carl.
Carl lost it.
No, that was quite a bit later. But If you saw the shingle machine, you wondered if he had any way out. It was really a wild outfit. I can remember it as I was just a little shaver. Boy, this thing just goes zip, 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 you know, and these single rock, and grab them, you know, it's just really. But in 1939, my dad got his first sawmill, a little portable, just a headrig, that's all. Had a weird John Deere engine driving it. It was 3-cylinder and burned stove oil. It wasn't a diesel or a gas, it's stove oil.
Stove oil?
Yeah, stove oil, which is like kerosene. And there was, on one end of the timber lease, there was quite a bit of western white pine growing there. And he started with this portable, the horse teams would drive the logs up to the mill. And then he was cutting match pines. And what they were 2 1/4 inches thick any width, didn't matter what the width was. And just an average length, 16 feet. And he cut those in the winter, and then they had to be dry piled. He'd haul them out and pile them at the siding, and then after they dried for a year, they loaded them out. And there was a match block factory in Nelson that cut them up into match lengths, split all the knots out of them, load them back in boxcars, and they went to Eddie Match in whole Quebec.
That was the white
He
pine,
did that
was
for
it?
many years. That
Robert's into
Match.
that white pine?
Yeah, from White Pine. Matchbox were how he got started in the sawmill business. And it's such a good company in Nelson. All he had to do was dry pile that wood. And then once a month, a fellow would come out from Nelson and he'd rough tally the dry pile, and Dad would get paid 80% for it. And then he'd get the 20% when he shipped it, so. That, he did that for many years afterwards, and western white pine, as you know, the western white pine there is no more, it was all killed by Buster Russ, so.
There's a little bit left.
Yeah, a little bit, I guess. Beautiful wood, though, but,
Oh, it's beautiful wood, there's no doubt about it, that's
yeah,
why there's none
the
left.
trouble with it was too, you could only saw it in the winter time, because you used to get the blue stain in it in the summer.
Don't go back, you're on the grill.
Oh, okay.
On the grill.
I'm just about finished here, you guys must
We
be
like
getting
this,
bored, but
Karen.
have another
No,
glass
no.
of
That's
wine.
great. This is very interesting.
Uh,
Tell them about your mother and the salt shaker.
Oh, that's, yeah, I said we didn't do stupid things, but we did. You know, well, we used to fish, you know, and the best bait for fish, as you all know, is grasshoppers. So we used to go out and catch grasshoppers, and we had to have something to put them in, so in those days, Windsor salt came in a round box about that big around and about that high, and it had a flip top spout on
You
it.
remember that, don't you?
No, hard to do that. They were ideal because you lifted the spout, put the grasshopper in, closed it, you know. Of course, we went out and got about a half a box of these things, and well, I didn't do it. Paul said he didn't do it. Somebody put this box of grasshoppers on the windowsill behind the sink in our kitchen. And Mom, and this must have been a little later on because we finally had
Mixed match.
a water-powered alternator, and we had electricity. My dad rigged this thing up with a water wheel and a generator, and cause Mom had, this particular day, had a Sunbeam Mixmaster, I remember. And she's making cream puffs, she used to make the best cream puffs. Cream puff doughs, you know, eggs and butter mainly, you know. Kind of going around there, you know, and reaches up for the salt. 12 grasshoppers go in. What did I say? Neither one of
Call
us,
salt.
neither one of us ever admitted.
Lots of protein in the dough.
Yeah, in 1941, of course, when the war in the Pacific started, and with all the men left, you couldn't hire anybody anywhere. There was just nobody to work. They were either been conscripted into the army or they went down to Vancouver to work in the war plant. So, Paul had remained home. He went to Vancouver College for 1 year, and then Dad kept him home because, to help. And, by that time, Mark and Bob had joined the Canadian Forces. They were gone, and, so they moved the Japanese into the internment camp in New Denver. They moved about 10,000 Japanese in there in 1941. And the BC Security Commission had a deal that you could employ them. If you had work, you could take them out of the camp and, you know, and employ them. And I think you paid them, the government, a certain amount of money, and a certain amount went to the workers. I think it was 75 cents a day. And so my dad had a Japanese crew. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have been able to operate during the war. And they were, a lot of them were young fellows that came off the logging operations on the coast, and they were really good workers, and that was really his saving grace there. Yeah, and it was around that time too. Well, you know, things, my dad always he kept improving things. He added on to the house, and as I said, he had an AC power generator finally that he rigged up, and so we finally had electric light. No refrigeration, no. There's still, we didn't really have enough power to run a refrigerator.
Cool in the creek, didn't they?
Yeah, well, we had a cool creek behind that. He had boxes in where they could keep milk and stuff in there. But every winter they used to cut ice off of Summit Lake. They had these ice saws, you know, and they cut it into a square block. And took the horse and sleigh out of back. They had an ice house at the house, and they put that in there, and they just covered it with sawdust, you know, in fact that ice would stay just about all the next summer.
Oh,
And then you dig one block out and stick it in the ice box. Yeah, that wasn't the best, but it worked, I guess.
Would?
Dad was a really good gardener. Him, my mother, you know, and it's passed on to some of these, you see these girls like Rita and Isabel and all of them, how they grow stuff, you know.
And Lisa's a gardener. Your daughter came through
Yeah,
your daughter.
yeah, Lisa, yeah. It seems to have passed on through the family. And Pete grew just about everything we had. Rosie raised chickens, you know, and had eggs. And, you know, we'd take a crate of eggs in Saturday night into the grocery store in New Denver, and we'd trade it for groceries, you know, so. They didn't really have to buy a great deal. And we had all what they didn't use fresh. They canned everything in jars. We really didn't lack very much. We had our own beef, we had a couple of pigs every year.
That's why Mom can everything too. And
Now I got, when the war was over, of course, we know that Paul met his future wife Ann, got married in 1950. And by that time, they were building a stationary electric mill on Wilson Lake, which was a pretty good mill. And I was going to school and university at the coast. I wasn't at home very much, just in the summer. But I always liked Paul, because when I came home, especially when I was at university, I had 4.5 months off. He always had some extra work to do. He liked making extra money, and we'd do things like work all day, you know, logging, and eat a quick supper, and then we'd grab the truck and we'd cut a load of firewood, and we'd haul it in New Denver and sell it. Or one year we talked Dad into giving us a contract to load that white pine out all the drive while. So we'd roar down there and load one flat car of white pine, and then go home, buy a brick of ice cream on the way home. But it was great for me, because I was at university. Now I had extra cash. I just had a little extra money, and Paul was great. He always had something figured out, but he was making extra money too. In 1959, I was home for a year in '58, I think, and then in '59, my brother Bob had got some timber up in Terrace, and he had a little portable mill, but he was really having trouble financing it, so my dad got me to go up there, and then shortly after Paul came, I think in 1959, and we put a few dollars into that and got the thing going and built a very good mill up there. But one of the problems with Terrace is that Paul was allergic to something and they really couldn't figure out what it was, but he got asthma. And it was really bad and it got worse. And you know, he ended up spending time in the hospital every year, and then I met Marguerite and Terrace, and we were married, and we had some very good times with Paul and Ann up there, but it just got so bad that Paul and I decided that he couldn't stay there any longer. So we sold that, and he moved to Vernon here, and we went to Saskatchewan. And,
He opened Sioux Hoover.
yeah, and
They purchased.
unknown to anybody at that time, though, that Vernon has the best climate in the world for the treatment of asthma. And then he came down here, and he wasn't cured of it, but, you know, he was able to live down here, you know, in relative comfort. So, we did the right thing. We just got him out of there, and I think in later years, some doctor decided that he was allergic to balsam fir. And balsam fir was not
When you
quite
get
a
rid of it in
dangerous
the mill, we
species,
just
but
run
always,
over balsam.
you know, if you couldn't live with balsam fir, you couldn't live there because there was so much of it around, you know.
Yeah.
So after we came back from Terrace and we left to Saskatchewan, we didn't see Paul do that much. I must say though, he's my only brother that came to see me in the 9 years I was in Saskatchewan. So I kind of lost track of him a bit, and that's why the people that lived here really saw more of him than I did.
Until late, I mean, the last.
Yeah, and then after we came back, we went to Turkey for a while and back, and then we always made a point of coming here. And this was our destination. And when we heard that he had passed away, Marguerite and I said, we should have a family gathering, because this era is over. We will never have a family gathering in this residence again. And I'm just so thankful that all of you could come, you know, and be here for this last time.
And know a little of the history, yeah.
Yeah, and before I forget, I just wanna thank Brian and Rita Usher for the work that they did. They looked after all the arrangements and everything. Brian did the obituary, he did the eulogy, which I thought was
Did the funeral.
fantastic.
The funeral.
What a great job, well done.
And Rita and Terry did all the flowers in the church.
Flowers.
Some of them are here. You did it.
No,
Fantastic, yeah.
Great.
something else that Brian did, this is a house in Winlaw, when my father came to Canada. He built this house, he was working at the mill in Winlaw, and this was in '09. He was married in January of '09, and this must have been a year later, because he has
The house is
Rosalie
built.
in his arms already. But if anybody would like one of these, just come and get it.
Yeah.
Whoever
Maybe
takes,
somebody
takes
from
it
each
first,
family.
whoever takes it
Somebody from
first.
each family,
Yeah.
probably. Joey, where's Joey?
Who's got one here?
Joey should get one, yeah.
Yeah.
Where's family?
You like,
Kenny,
Nikki?
Kenny, 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 Ken, I'm sorry, Ken, I can't call you Ken. Kenny.
That's good.
Yeah, how many left? 3?
Yeah,
Oh,
there's
I got
two.
3 more.
If there are not enough, if anybody doesn't get one, just come and see me and I will send you
Yeah,
one.
Brian can always get it.
Robert,
He had this scanned
keep
off
one
that,
to Barbie, keep one.
off that picture on the wall. It's really a nice job.
We can always get
Louis, you got it?
Yeah, Robert, well, then you, yeah, we can get it.
No, and as I say, Marguerite and I thought it was only proper. We were all able to get together here for the last time.
He's not finished yet, you guys. Pay attention. If you want more wine.
Now you can really have
Oh, we have lots of wine.
We have lots of wine.
Incidentally, you can thank my son Mark for the wine. He got here just on time on Saturday. So if you didn't like the wine, talk to Mark.
Hey, Dad.
You better not.
Dad.